Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to this dialogue with the press and the public, the launch of the OECD's Agricultural Ministerial Meeting. I'm going to turn the floor immediately over to Ken Ash, the Director of Trade and Agriculture at the OECD, who will then open the event. You'll hear from the Secretary General, Mr. Angel Gurria. You'll hear from the French Minister of Agriculture, Agri-Food and Fisheries, Mr. Foll, and then you'll hear from the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. There is simultaneous interpretation available for those who would need it for French and English. The devices are available in the back. Hand it over to Ken, please.
Thank you, Larry, and good afternoon, everybody. Ministers of Agriculture about 6 years ago asked us to schedule this meeting. They wanted to be sure there was an opportunity for today's Ministers of Agriculture to essentially take stock of their policy set and to have a conversation around the degree to which it was well aligned with economic and market opportunities, evolving resource constraints, and the expectations of both producers and consumers in developed countries, in emerging countries, and in less developed countries. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The OECD has prepared some background information that is available to ministers. It's also available to all of you. It's online, and we have paper copies at the back. Finally, I just want to point out for the press that if you want more detail than you find in our papers, we have staff who will be available today, tomorrow, and in the months and years to come. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I'll turn it over to the people that you actually came to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, Ambassador Duquesne, Ambassador Johannes, dear friends, and of course, ministers. In less than 1 hour, agricultural ministers from around 45 countries and counting will begin their deliberations on better policies to achieve a productive, sustainable and resilient global food system. This is the main theme of this gathering. It is going to be chaired by Stephane Foll, Minister of Agriculture, Agri-Food and Forestry of France, and Tom Vilsack, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, whom we will listen in a moment. The meeting is timely and relevant. Today, the agriculture and food sector is facing significant challenges. Global food security, resource scarcity, climate change, all have incidence in the sector. There are also important opportunities. A growing, higher income and increasingly urbanized population will continue to demand a more diversified, nutritionally balanced diet. The bioeconomy, including renewable energy, will also increase demand for food and agricultural products. Now, with the right policies in place, we can generate the sustainable productivity growth needed to overcome the obstacles and seize those opportunities. The ministerial meeting is particularly timely because it comes after a number of events. First, what policies need to be in place so that the food and the farm sector can actually contribute to the fullest extent possible to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals that were approved in September at the UN. We should not forget that 87% of the world's poor people depend heavily on agriculture for their livelihood. The other is what policies are needed to enable farmers to both adapt to and help mitigate the impacts of climate change. There again, this is a follow-up by the specialists in the sector to the part that applies to agriculture about the COP21 that was so aptly driven to a historic agreement here in France at the end of last year. And of course, the last bit of multilateralism that was practiced as the year was ebbing was the WTO meeting in Nairobi about what needs to be done to continue the process of integrating food and agriculture into international markets. In fact, we were talking in the bilateral at a given point in the international agreements that are being discussed and negotiated. So, dear friends, the OECD aims to be at the cutting edge of these issues, providing the evidence, the analysis to address these questions. Our mission is simple: better agricultural policies for better lives. So let me now ask the co-chairs, Stephane Le Foll of France and Secretary Vilsack, to share their views, and there will be an opportunity after that to perhaps pose some questions or comments or violent objections. Stephane Le Foll, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général.
Secretary General, first of all, I would like to thank you for organising this ministerial meeting on agriculture. I would point out that the last of these ministerial meetings took place 6 years ago, and so the time was ripe to organise a debate about agricultural issues here at the OECD. You know that France attaches great importance to this organisation. I am also delighted to share the chairmanship with Mr. Vilsack, who has been the Minister for Agriculture for much longer than I have. 4 years is already a very long time for a French minister. And he gave me some advice the first time that I met him. I have tried to follow that advice. I'm very, very pleased to be co-chairing this meeting with him, France and the United States in the chair. These two countries are major agricultural powers and have been for many years. And when necessary, our relative histories have played very important roles, and that is something we should remember when doubts arise. So, very pleased to be co-chairing with Mr. Vilsack here. As the Secretary-General has said, this is an event that takes place at the crossroads of many different events, tensions around the world. We know that in the domains of food and access to food, imbalances can lead to major geopolitical conflicts with very severe consequences. So, to talk about agriculture and food is also a diplomatic issue, a geopolitical issue, and international issue. So it is an excellent thing that this meeting should have been organised to discuss these issues. The challenge facing us relates to food, how to meet the food needs of a world population that is ever growing. The challenge is also environmental. Climate, global warming with its various consequences, drought, flooding, extreme climate events. This is very much a current issue, and we know that it is going to become ever more important in the future. Agriculture is therefore at the very heart of the major issues facing the world today, food and environment. There is also a very significant social dimension, and the Subdirector mentioned that earlier. There are many countries in the world today that need agriculture because there is no other sector of the economy that can provide employment to their populations. I remember in this regard a number of colleagues, conversations that I've had with my colleagues in Africa. Agriculture is vital in those countries. Young people are now coming onto the labour market, and they need to be given prospects. agriculture is part of the challenge in providing a future, providing career options for young people. More than 100 million young people will be needing to earn their living and will be depending on agriculture for their livelihoods. And we must bear in mind the essential factor of this meeting. Globalization is with us, and it has impacts, from drought in Australia one year, which has an impact on the price of wheat for the following year, to flooding in other countries. And if there are major crises in several major producing countries at the same time, the impact on prices can be dramatic. The world of today is very interconnected. What happens in one part of the world can have immediate consequences for the rest of the market around the world. And that is why we need to be able to cooperate, to discuss these issues, to exchange experiences so that we can better act to bring supply in line with demand in agriculture. It is very important with regard to society in general as well, with regard to combating climate change. Too often agriculture is framed as being a problem. We need to envisage it as part of the solution. France has made a proposal on the 4 for 1,000 project for carbon storing in the world. What is this 4 for 1,000 program? If you could, for every 1,000 grams of carbon consumed and ejected into the atmosphere, you could fix 4 grams in the ground, then you could significantly reduce the impact of those carbon emissions. So agriculture in that regard is part of the solution. We do need to we need to explore the options. Innovation is crucial, and so research is at the centre of this debate. In the domain of agriculture, there are many elements of convergence with this worldwide debate. I have mentioned the geopolitical, environmental and social dimensions of that debate. That is why the 3 main areas of work chosen here for this meeting are so important. Productivity, how to meet world demand, how can farmers live from their farming activities. Sustainability, a major issue. How are we going to ensure that all of these activities are sustainable and in line with major environmental challenges? And resilience, the capacity to adapt to the impacts on productivity, to the impact of extreme weather events and other challenges. We're going to be discussing all of these issues this afternoon and tomorrow, and I believe that at the end of these 2 days, we will find that our debates have been very useful in defining the major outlines of our common approach into the future. So I would like to thank the Secretary-General and UNESCO. I would like to thank Mr. Vilsack for being here and for co-chairing this meeting with me. Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Minister Tom Vilsack.
Well, Mr. Secretary-General, thank you very much for the leadership that OECD has provided in convening this opportunity. It is an organization that is dedicated to good governance, democratic values, and market-based growth. These concepts and values are extraordinarily important in the context of the challenge that we face. Its focus on data-driven policy, I think, can be instructive and helpful as we try to meet the serious challenge of global food security. And I want to thank my good friend, Minister Foll, for not only his friendship, but also his graciousness in welcoming me back to Paris. I was here for the COP21 and had an opportunity to visit with him then. Yesterday we had a chance to see that agriculture is not all rural, that indeed there are rooftops here in Paris that are producing some extraordinary specialty crops, and that is a part of the vision of a new agriculture that's being crafted here in France, and certainly something that we are interested in the U.S. You know, I think the Secretary General did a great job of suggesting why there is momentum for this meeting and why it is timely after 6 years that agriculture ministers and others meet. We clearly have momentum from Nairobi and the WTO ministerial, the G20 agricultural minister meeting of last year. the COP21 meeting in Paris and the accord that occurred from it, and of course the challenge that the UN has put forward with its Sustainable Development Goals. And I think the Minister has laid out the challenge that we all face. Over the course of the next 35 years, it's anticipated and expected that global population will increase to 9 billion. According to the UN, that's going to require us to increase agricultural productivity by 70% to meet the needs of that growing population. We're going to have to do it at a time when farmers will be faced with a challenging climate, one that will be constantly changing, one that will provide for more intense storms, outbreaks of pests and diseases that we've not yet faced, perhaps. It will be a challenge. And we have to do this all at the same time in developed nations as we see an aging farming population and at the same time providing opportunities for both large and small-scale agriculture. I think there are solutions to the challenges that we face, and I think this meeting is going to allow us to focus on a number of them. I think it is correct that there needs to be a global commitment and recommitment to expanded research, the need for us to utilize our collective wisdom to meet these challenges. I think that research needs to be more readily available, more open, and certainly I think in this meeting we will discuss the benefits of open data, something that the United States is very much committed to, as many other nations. I think it's going to be important for us to continue to look for ways in which we can work in an integrated fashion. That, of course, means continued focus on open and fair trade systems that reduce the friction in terms of the movement of goods and services across borders. Certainly the U.S. is committed to that effort and will continue to work with its partners to ensure a frictionless trade system. We need to look for ways in which we can share information about resilience. In the U.S., we have made a commitment to reducing emissions in agriculture over the course of the next several years by a significant amount. We are anxious to share our efforts with the rest of the world. We are also anxious to identify climate-smart agricultural practices, best practices, that can be shared among nations so that we become more efficient, more effective, and more productive. We are looking forward to continued work in terms of resilience. We are in the process in the U.S. of evaluating the vulnerabilities of our agricultural sector to climate and the changes of climate. We're identifying adaptation and mitigation strategies, and we are anxious to learn from others as they assess their vulnerabilities and figure out how best to mitigate and adapt. We also recognize that we all have a moral responsibility to use the food that we have more effectively. Nearly 30% of food that is produced in this world today is unfortunately lost or wasted. Were it not lost and wasted, we would have enough to feed the over 800 million food insecure people in the world today. So there are many opportunities here. And I think I'll end with just to reinforce the message that Minister Foll provided to all of us. And that is a recognition of the significance that agriculture plays in security, not just global food security, but security generally. I think oftentimes the role of agriculture is underappreciated and underestimated. Its capacity to be part of the solution is underutilized, and I'm hopeful that this meeting will give us further impetus to understand the important role that agriculture will play now and in the future in making a safer, better world. Certainly like the OECD's statement of better policies for better lives, and certainly I think agriculture is the center of that.
Thank you very much, Minister, Secretary General. We'll open the floor now for questions. Please introduce yourself and your media.
Sorry. Rudy Rutenberg with Bloomberg News. A question for both ministers, or from both Mr. Vilsack and Mr. Foll. You mentioned the statistic, Mr. Vilsack, of 70% production increase. How is that going to be expressed exactly? Because there's a little bit of debate about how much food production really needs to increase. Are you talking about calories? Are you talking about something else? And then another question is about sea level rise. The Hansen paper suggests it might be a lot quicker than we expect. That will probably affect a lot of agricultural land. Are there any estimates of the production effect of future sea level rise over the 21st century? Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that question first. Let me answer the second question first on the sea level rise. Part of what we have established in the U.S. is a series of climate hubs, and one of those hubs is located in Puerto Rico. And the purpose of it is to take a look at the impact on changing climates on Caribbean agriculture, which of course would include sea level rise in coastal areas, and addressing that in terms of trying to provide strategies for dealing and adapting and mitigating. I think, frankly, we don't know at this point what we don't know. That's why we're doing the assessment. That's why we're trying to determine the vulnerabilities. And that's why we are happy to share whatever information we have. I've extended an invitation to the Cuban agricultural minister to accompany me to Puerto Rico in May so that we can both learn what has been undertaken in terms of that review. In terms of food production, I think it is at the end of the day about feeding people in a nutritious and sustainable way. It's about making sure that there not only are there adequate crops being raised, but that they actually get to the people that are in need of them, that there are transportation systems, regulatory systems, food safety systems, trading systems that provide and enable people to get the food that they need to sustain themselves. I think it is important to point out that I don't see agriculture in quite the competitive way that a lot of others see it. I think because of this increased demand, because of growing middle classes in a number of areas of the world, including Asia, I think there is opportunity for all of us if we structure this right, integrate it, and coordinate it. That's why I think it is important for nations to participate in the Climate Smart Agricultural Alliance and share best practices as it relates to climate. That's why I think it's important for us to be engaged in open data, opening up the research that's being done at USDA and making it available to the rest of the world. It's why we are one of the founding members of the Global Research Alliance, looking at this issue of crop production, animal production, rice production in the context of climate change. I think open data is one very important aspect of how best to respond to these challenges.
Sur la question de la potentielle production, le 70%, etc. Oui,
Well, with regard to the potential for production, I'm not going to repeat what's already been said, but what strikes me is that we have a very high potential. Now, I say this with every caution, but if you add the fight against waste, aiming to reduce everything that is lost and wasted today, then it seems to me that the issue of resolving hunger in the world, an issue which has often been considered insoluble, is something that we have every capacity now to achieve. If you look at it in terms of calorie needs, we have every capacity to feed 7, 8, 9 billion people. What is essential here is to balance supply and demand. What Tom has said concerning the various technical aspects of production, digital technologies, big data, research, and so on, leads me to think that there's a great deal of potential and a great deal of capacity on that side. But the challenge that faces us at a global level is that there's going to be worldwide trade in commodities. There's going to be trade in very specialized products. And there's going to be development of production, consumption, and distribution at a local level. This is already happening in the United States. This is already being organized in the developed countries. And this is a particular issue that needs to be dealt with in the developing countries as well. With all of those elements at our fingertips, I hope and I believe that we have the capacity to meet the world's food needs. I'd just like to give you a quote from Edgar Pisani that I really like. He said, "One day we're going to need all of the world's farms to feed the world." And I think that we have now reached a point where that quote is really coming into its own. Thank you very much.
I see right here. Yes, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Gus Trumpus from Reuters. Two questions for the ministers. First question is, compared to the meetings that took place in 2010 and around that time, there was at that point a lot of debate about biofuels, about whether we should have global grain reserves and things like that. From what you're saying, has the debate and the focus of the debate changed? Are we talking more about climate now, more about sharing data and technology? That's the first question. Second question, this meeting takes place at a time when the United States and the European Union are in the middle of difficult trade negotiations, where agriculture is one of the stumbling blocks. Is that does that affect how much progress you can make in this meeting, and how specific the kind of agreements you can make here? Thank you.
I'll answer first, if I may. I said that the United States, France and Europe have interests in international negotiations, but that doesn't prevent us from remembering that we also have responsibilities that go beyond those negotiations. Responsibilities that concern trade. I think we've given enough examples so far of that fact. The need, or agriculture is something that goes beyond trade interests. Now, there are interests, of course, between the United States, France and Europe. France is a major agricultural country. We're looking at this very carefully with a certain amount of wariness, but that doesn't prevent us from co-chairing a meeting here at the OECD to talk about the future of agriculture. So I think you need to really assume your responsibilities here and approach it in that spirit, Mr. Secretary General. If we focus more on trade than on the other major issues facing the world, I'm sure that you'll remind us of that fact and put us on the straight and narrow, Mr. Secretary General. Often discussions take place between the United States and France on these issues. Those discussions are not always easy. We're not always on the same wavelength. We don't always have exactly aligned interests, but that in no way prevents us from considering that the United States, France and Europe have responsibilities that rise well above these political and commercial issues. It's very important to remember that. Even though there are negotiations underway, we are here also to remind everyone that in terms of the future of agriculture, France and the United States have much in common, are facing common issues, and have the capacity to mobilize together to deal with these overarching problems that we're all facing.
The first question about how is it different today? Or is it really different today?
Well, there are some significant differences between now and 6 years ago. I just made a quick list of some of the things that have occurred in the last 6 years which helped to shape this agenda. A commitment to open data. There was not a global open data for agriculture and nutrition initiative 6 years ago. There was not a great deal of thought on the part of major developed nations about opening up information, opening up data. There is now a solid commitment by us to do that, understanding that it makes sense and it will require an opportunity for us to be more efficient with our time, given the limited amount of time that we have between now and the growing world population. We didn't really have a functioning global research alliance at the time. Now over 40 countries working collaboratively together to look at issues relating to climate change and the research agenda, making sure that we don't duplicate or replicate our research so that we can get to answers and solutions more quickly. The development a year or so ago of the Climate Smart Agricultural Alliance, now over 100 members, including NGOs and countries, committed to sharing best practices as it relates to climate. All of that, I think, reflects a greater understanding and appreciation of the need for coordination and integration in agriculture and in food production and in food systems. I would say that there are many, many more areas that we agree than disagree on issues. Trade, obviously, is an area that does require very conscientious negotiations. I think it requires us listening very carefully to each other so that we can actually refine and define the differences to determine creative solutions to providing for better integration and coordination. But there's also coordination, integration, and investment in food aid, in the assistance that we're currently providing to developing nations. I know the U.S. is very much involved in our Feed the Future initiative, and many nations are doing the same, sharing information. That Feed the Future was not mature 6 years ago. It is today, helping to train producers in developing countries, help them create markets that are stable, helping them to develop regulations and systems that allow for greater trade opportunities, focusing on food safety, focusing on better storage options. So there is, I think, a significantly different climate today than there was 6 years ago. I think to Minister Foll's point, there is now a growing appreciation for the nexus between global security and agriculture and food, which perhaps wasn't as well appreciated or known 6 years ago. So I would say that there is significant differences between then and now, which help to shape this agenda. I think the agenda is right. Innovation is key. Research is key. Resilience is key. But also international cooperation reflected in trade, investment, and open data initiatives also is key.
Je ne sais pas, Monsieur Le Foll.
Mr. Le Foll, I'm not sure if you'd like also to mention the French initiative launched when France was presiding the G20. That is something that also transformed the reality that Mr. Vilsack has referred to. Well, yes, Secretary General, we discussed this a little bit earlier before this press conference to launch the ministerial meeting. The G20 meeting in France in 2011 led to the establishment of the AMIS system, which is the Agricultural Market Information System for a transparent exchange of information on agricultural and food markets. That is a transparency that avoids any kind of speculation that would lead to price rises or drops. Now, when I became minister in 2011, I had contacts with Mr. Vilsack, and we reactivated this system. We had exchanges under the French the American presidency of the G20, and then subsequently under the Russian presidency. And we have learnt something from this. We have created the equivalent of AMIS, the Agricultural Market Information System, at the level of the Mediterranean, AMED, that informs us with regard to stocks, particularly grain reserves, which have a significant importance. The south of the Mediterranean region is not self-sufficient in this regard. So this is a system that installed the necessary transparency for this system. And we have also set up an equivalent of AMIS at G20 level, therefore, for this region, AMIC-MED. And remember that at the time of the Arab Spring, grain prices shot up, and that was one of the aspects that led to a citizens' uprising and the revolutions that took place at that time. It's an extremely important subject, even with regard to politics and security. If we don't open up prospects for agricultural development in the sub-Saharan African world, then there's going to be 100 million young people coming onto the labour market in the next 15 years who will not be able to find work. These people need to find employment. They need to find a way of sustaining themselves, of guaranteeing their livelihoods. So agriculture is an issue that is intimately bound with those challenges. In the context of the G20 and China, it has been agreed to build in agriculture as a dimension for discussion in the next G20 meeting. Under the Turkish presidency, Tom Vilsack came with me to Istanbul, and we talked about these issues. the need to continue to support this system for exchange of agricultural market information. This is something very important because price variations can have major consequences. Sometimes price fluctuations are based on misinformation, and therefore it's extremely important to be transparent with regard to information. With regard to China, stocks were of the order of 115 million tons of corn, of maize. That's more than the production of the United States and Mexico combined, I believe, for 1 year. Now we have that information. So how do you deal with these issues and the potential market consequences? This is something that can have an impact on production and on prices, and it can have quite a dramatic impact at that. So it is our responsibility to ensure such transparency through cooperation.
Question from the press. Right there then, Caroline. Micro.
Oui, bonjour. Clio Randib.
Hello, Pierre Randib. I am a French journalist, and I will ask my question in French. You briefly mentioned the mass arrival of young people who will be looking for employment in agriculture, and therefore this is a sector that will need to accommodate them. That being said, it seems to me that generational renewal is a complex issue. That is true for France, but I believe for other countries as well. Have you envisaged working further on this issue? Thank you. If I may, Mr. Secretary General. This is a debate that is aiming to cover all of the issues in the domain of agriculture and food production. We're talking about production, talking about sustainability and resilience. So in that context, all issues can be discussed over the course of an afternoon and a day of work. Now, I think that Tom Vilsack, in his policy in the United States, is looking at the renewal of generations. This is an issue which I think can be envisaged from three different angles. First of all, with regard to the European continent and countries like France, it relates to the access to land. That's a major issue. And it confronts us in Europe because we have quite a high population density, much higher than in other continents, whether you're talking about Latin America or North America and the United States. Competition with regard to access to land. Belgium, for example, 400 inhabitants per square kilometre. The Netherlands, 450, 470 people per square kilometre. So the tensions between urbanisation, infrastructure and agriculture are clear, and access to land is difficult. If we want to renew generations, we need to facilitate access to land. So land rights or land use policy. Secondly, having the necessary capital for agricultural production, particularly in developed countries. We need to think also with regard to developing countries. Capital is increasingly important. The amounts of investments required are higher and higher. So young people who want to move into farming need to find the funding to do that. And that is an issue for people in France. Land access plus the significance of investment required. What is our approach? What is our strategy? Well, we are aiming to share capital, to ensure that farmers will have access to part of the capital but not a monopoly over that capital, so that young people are not prevented from entering the sector. That is something we've been discussing in terms of economic and environmental challenges as well. How can we ensure that capital can be shared so that there is shared access to agricultural land? So I've mentioned land, I've talked about capital. Thirdly, training. I think that is a major challenge as well, particularly for the African countries, because we know those countries well now, but it also applies to a certain number of other developing countries. Training of farmers, training them to be both managers and agronomists. This is very important. It's key to our capacity to renew farming and generations.
Explain there the question of rural against urban, and then, of course, this question of absorption and the agriculture as a job rather than one that is declining as a job absorber. Yes?
The challenge that we face in the U.S. is an aging farm population where 3 times the number of farmers over the age of 65 than under the age of 35, just to give you one data point. The average age of farmers in America is 58 and has been aging fairly significantly over the last 15 to 20 years. Part of the answer from our perspective is diversity. Diversity of size of operations and making sure that individuals who are interested in getting into the farming business have many entry points, that they aren't only fortunate enough to be able to inherit land or be part of a farm family, that there are ways in which individuals who do not have that opportunity are still able to enter the farming opportunity. We're doing this through our beginning farmer effort. We're doing it through creating new market opportunities on a local and regional scale so that smaller holders can negotiate their own prices with a local school or a farmer's market or a local restaurant or series of restaurants, creating an individualized and personal market that makes it a little bit easier for them to get in the business. The minister's right, land access is an important one. From our perspective, 40% of the land that is farmed today in America is rented, which means it's owned by non-farm farming families. That's liable to increase significantly, and the question then will be, what will be the values, what will be the goal of those landowners? Will it be to maximize profit, or will they be willing to understand the importance of sustainability and conservation? That's a challenge, so we will be having conversations about that later this year. I think it's instructive that farming is now not just, as I said earlier, limited to rural areas. That's also true in the U.S. We're beginning to see a rather significant expansion of urban agriculture. That means essentially taking brownfields, areas that were industrialized in the past, now being converted into farms in some of our major cities. It also means indoor farming, ways in which people are utilizing factories with LED lighting and micronutrient spraying systems to create significant production, especially of specialty crops and greens. So I think there are a number of creative ways to deal with this. I would say it also, I think, is important how we market agriculture. I think there is a tendency, and earlier it was said that we look at agriculture as part of the problem instead of part of the solution. I think we market agriculture in that same way. I spoke recently to a group of farmers, young farmers here, earlier today, and I stressed to them that we can't sell farming based on the fact that it's hard work, overregulated, and overtaxed, which is what you often hear from farmers. You have to sell it on the fact that it's entrepreneurial, it's innovative, it's creative, it's fashionable. And you frankly also have to open it up to just people other than young men. The meeting I had today did not include any women farmers, and I asked the question, where were the women? Here in the U.S., we're beginning to see a significant interest on the part of women, people of color, returning veterans who were raised in rural areas who come back from Iraq and Afghanistan and need the nurturing experience of raising something and growing something and getting their hands in the soil. We're trying to create more opportunities for them. So we're trying to provide that training, that technical assistance more easily through a series of web-based programs. So there's a concerted effort here, and I think over time we're going to see a lot more interest, and we're going to see greater diversity within agriculture within the U.S., and that's going to help us instruct and provide assistance and help in other areas where they're dealing with a similar problem.
Asia, the women were always there. Huh?
70% of the world's farmers are women, but not necessarily in the United States, and I'm not quite sure what the percentage is in France, but there weren't any women.
And the Mexicans were always there.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Merci beaucoup à toutes et à tous.
Thank you to all. And let us go to the ministerial itself.
In your seats for a moment as the ministers and the Secretary General make their way out.
Oh, we stay here for the photo. The photo. Okay. Photo. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Please.
Bonne journée.